each other and to share as we go. So, who wants to make the bracha? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'timanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Great Torah.
Anyway, this week's Torah's portion is Parshas Bahar. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor. Hashem said to Moshe and Har Sinai, saying, interesting, if you start off with the first pasuk, why does it say? Usually in the Torah, whenever Hashem's speaking to Moshe, it just simply says, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor. What's this whole Bahar Sinai Lemor? Introducing the three most important, not most important, but the three most things that are spoke about in this week's Torah portion, which is Shemitah, Yovel, and Onah, which is dealing honestly in business transactions. So I was thinking about why does it have to start with Bahar Sinai? What was so special about that? We can get into it later, but I think that's something, first of all, to look at. Why it says Bahar Sinai. Daber abin second pasuk. Daber b'nei Yisrael amarta alehem ki sovo. Speak to the b'nei Yisrael ki sovo el arts when you come into the land. Asher ani nosein lachem, which I gave you, which is a little bit interesting, problematic, because he really didn't give it to us forever, but it still says Asher ani nosein lachem. The Shafsa ha'aretz, and the land should rest like a Shabbos. Is Shabbos to Hashem, a Shabbos to God. I mean, these are just my little notes, afterward. You're seeing them when I'm thinking. The land of Israel doesn't belong to us. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's owned by God, by Hashem, and remains Hashem's land forever. It's given to us for a certain amount of time, but God is telling us that the land must rest every 7 years, and it's to be a Shabbos to Hashem. Eventually, I think is printing the Kedusha Slayer, the Barditcheva on this, but we'll see when it comes. And then it goes on, and it starts explaining really what Shemitah is all about. That Sheishanim Tizra Sadecha, Sheishanim Tizmor Karmecha, Bastaptes Tuvasa. 6 years you should plant in the vineyard, in your field, etc. On the 7th year, Bashana Hashvius, on the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson Yel Hashem Yel La'aretz, should be a Shabbos to the land. Shabbos LaHashem, Sadcha Lo Tizra, V'Karmcha Lo Tizmar. As Seviach Kirtzircha Lo Tiksar, as Invain Zeracha Lo Tiva, Shabbos whatever. Vayisha Shabbos Hashem Lahem La'achla, Lovdacha La'amasa L'Sichra, Ule Shichracha. And this is where I think it should be a Shabbos for everybody, but you should be able to eat from the land, but not do business from it. It literally says fallow, and you don't do anything with it, but you're allowed to eat from it, but don't do any business. Mm-hmm. And interesting, it says, "Uletoshvecha hageri mimecha," and to the workers that are living with you.
That's your mark. It says.
Yeah, that's my. Where's the? I have a question mark there. Yeah. Oh, you have a question?
No.
Oh, why did I put a question?
I'm wondering why there's a question mark after
Yeah, because I was asking myself, and I was wondering, what does that mean?
Yeah.
The workers, and we were alluding to it before. What does that mean? The workers that are living with you. Who are they? Does anybody know?
Indentured servants.
Yeah, where did they come from?
Egypt.
Foreign land?
Egypt.
No. So in those days, I'll just give a little, introduction or a little bit of color here. So when we came into the land, like it says in the beginning of the Torah portion, God gave to the tribes and to every single family. And if I'm saying anything wrong, anybody, please just jump in. He gave everybody a plot of land, every family. Yeah. And I'm supposed to farm the land, make a business out of it, my family. What happens if, throughout the history, if one farmer was not a good farmer, not a good businessman, his family? So eventually he had to sell a piece of his allotted lands to either somebody who was like one of the four on his four, his neighbor. And after a while, if he still was not being a good businessman, he eventually, his entire plot of land went to the guy next to him. And then what did he do? He was the worker. He was the guy who owned this original plot of land, and he worked on somebody else's, basically on his own land, but in somebody else's property. I mean, that's how it got to that point. So when the Pasuk is talking about that, it's speaking about another Jew who was not such a great businessman, and he ended up being with his neighbors,
Get enslaved.
right?
Eventually.
And then eventually he was like a slave.
Who may not be Hebraic. In other words,
If you own the land, he
it's
had to
like-
be.
slowly introducing non-Jews into this whole thing about how non-Jews entered also, and what do you think about it? It's what I'm getting.
Non-Jews. Well, I don't think that it's referring to the non-Jews right here.
The workers
The workers,
might
these
not be Jews.
these workers in this
You can both.
pasuk was referring to the neighbor, another Jew who's also a farmer who had his own land. Because you're going to see as we go on that eventually in Yovel, the Jubilee year, it goes back to his ancestors or back to his family.
Mhm.
We're going to get into that, but anybody has any comments there? We're good for now.
That's a terrific lesson. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Hashem has this incredible way of
Redistributing.
redistributing, but also giving the land back and
Yeah,
then
that's
reestablishing
Right.
those who have bad
Right.
roots.
and we'll get to there. That's the next few. So, all right, you're spoiler alert. It's perfect. Great one. Where are we up to? And we can skip the next two.
I just want to jump in here for 1 second. I think that this points to the restorative approach. Like over time, you may have different interventions in the middle, but ultimately it's a restorative approach for both humanity and nature. And I think that those are the principles upon which we are all striving at this time to stand and are grappling with. So I really appreciate also your putting some color on this notion of how we become enslaved to money, to each other, to indebtedness, to there's a lack of circularity in the economy and in our relationship to nature. And we violated those principles, those very natural principles that I think are being articulated here. And then again, I just want to butt in to say that I think that that's where we're trying to go with our social action as well, which is what can we do that's restorative, that's nourishing people with food, that's supporting folks who are incarcerated, that are helping the immigrant and the refugee, so I think it's part of that restorative approach.
Yes, and thank you for that comment. And you're going to see in a few more psukim exactly that was God's plan, that there was no such thing as intergenerational wealth or poverty. You can never get excessively wealthy or excessively poor because of the Jubilee, which is Yovel, and everything returns back. So the farmer who was a better businessman, maybe for a certain amount of years, his wealth obviously accumulated. But the family that the farmer that wasn't that good, eventually they have a restart. So they're not going to be, he's still ahead, but he's not going to be like, the difference is not going to be monumental. Anyway.
Scandinavian socialism.
Oh, Scandinavian socialism.
I have a question. I mean, just to the beginning, the idea that God gave these people this plots of land, I guess that's just a leap of faith that we just have to say that's not the issue we're talking about. Like,
No, I'm not exactly sure, but I know that from me studying, right, all the tribes got every single one of the tribes except for Levi, because they were the rabbis and they were busy in the temple. They all got if you look at the map back from the olden days, they were it was all broken up, and they all had plots of land.
But I mean, it says God gave it to them. That seems like,
Yeah.
all right,
What does that mean? God gave it to them.
yeah,
It's God's land, right? The whole world is God's. So,
But that's an assumption
yeah, yeah,
that Alina is questioning.
yeah.
No assumption, that this is
I guess
found.
we can go past it, but it just, that's where I got,
yes,
yeah. But anyway, go back to the moral issue, which is really what we're talking about.
I just wanted to say that the Levi'im weren't rabbis. They were the leaders,
The
spiritual leaders.
yeah.
The rabbis.
Right. Well, they went around. Well,
And the Kohanim,
right.
internal to the Levium.
So they went around and they were like sharing the Torah. So, I mean, this is what I've always heard or studied. The Levium did that.
Well, they were in the temple or
Right.
before the temple, and they were helping the people bring sacrifices to God. It was different. It was a different thing than being a rabbi. That was later.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, in those days, the Kohanim actually were the priests that did the avoda, which is the service
Right.
and
And the Levi'im.
the sacrifices, the korbanot.
Yes.
But the Levium were kind of a support. They were more about, well, they sang. We all know the Levium sang, and they spread the Torahs.
No,
and
they
all the
also
different.
they also cleaned a lot. They cleaned up after all the sacrifices. They prepared the sacrifices to get ready. And so they were like they did all the back work and the music and the incense, all the stuff to make the space more ready to do what needed to be done. And also the laws of Shemitah and Yovel were only for Israel. It wasn't for the rest of the world. It was just, and the land, I think the land always, I think the assumption is the land belongs to God. And this is a gift from God, and we do what we need to do on the land in order to live, and then we at 50 years and everything goes back. Yeah.
Right. We don't own anything. That's the whole theme here.
Right.
We don't own the land. We don't own people. And that's really the theme of Shemitah and Yovel, the Jubilee year. And that's why it's connected. You're going to see this whole idea of dealing truthful and not doing underhanded business, which is called Onah, is also connected to it. Because once you realize that God owns everything, how in the world can you do something how in the world can you do a business transaction that's not ethical?
Hey guys, before we continue, online, in-person room, can you guys see the screen? Like, is it in gallery mode or? Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure, because like if anyone in the online community raises their hand or something, like I want to make sure that people get the chance to speak online, so.
I think I better sit here, sorry. I raised my hand, they can see it. I did
Awesome,
raise
okay,
my-
does anyone online want to speak or anything? Are we
Yeah.
okay? All right, thanks so much, guys.
I think there's a little confusion here. There's no tribe of Kohanim, but the Levium, the Kohanim came out of the tribe of Levi.
Right.
So it was the Levium who became, the Kohanim were part of which
Yeah.
were the priests.
Yeah.
The priesthood. There's not a separate tribe of Kohanim, but there is a separate tribe of Levi.
Levi, yes. Colin comes from Levi, right? And on that, I'm one of my friends, I don't know, shared with me years ago that Levi comes from the same place as Leviah. And we all know what a Leviah is. It means to accompany. And there's no way of really connecting with another friend or people unless it's what their conduit, which is the Torah. So the actual Leviah, when you accompany somebody who passed on, you walk with them after the funeral because you're accompanying them, and hopefully all their beautiful things they did in their lifetime, you're walking together with the person that just passed on. You're accompanying him, And the only true way of ever connecting with people is to really, it's a lot of, through good things, whether it's a Torah, or whether it's through a chesed, things like that, beautiful things. And that's a true way of,
Pleasure.
Thank you. I just want to say one more thing. I think there's another situation which, I've studied the Bible, so I know pretty much what we're talking about here. But what I want to say is this, that there are 12 tribes of Israel that came out of Egypt. And very often I hear in sermons and different things that it was the Jews came out of Egypt. Yeah, the Jews were part of the tribes, the 12 tribes.
Mhm.
They were one tribe, but they keep reiterating that, and they don't mention any of the other tribes. The Jewish people today are not all the 12 tribes. Because if that was so, then the blessings and the promises that were given to Abraham are totally not real. But they are real, because the tribes of Israel are the nations of the world, most of them, a good part of the nations of the world. And there's evidence within those nations that there's connections
Yeah.
to ancient Israel. I just want to say that, because the Jews are only 20 million people on the planet, maybe 25 at the most, 25 million, and there are almost 8 billion people.
Mhm.
So what happened? Abraham was told that his children, his descendants, would be as numerous as the sand at the
Yes.
seashore.
Oh,
And if you try to count the sand at the seashore,
Yeah.
like,
thank you.
I just wanted
Yeah.
to, okay, you're welcome.
I think we can proceed. I'm going to turn the page. I don't know. Varta shofar trua bechodesh hashvi b'echad lechodesh b'yom kippurim kavir shofar b'chol artzechem. And they used to, after when it came to the Jubilee year, they used to blow the shofar, right? And basically recognizing that this is the Jubilee, this is the Yovel year, and everybody used to go outside at the same time and blow the shofar. I think that's really interesting, because it's kind of like, usually I was sharing last night at dinner, Alex was there, and some few other people were there, friends of ours, that a lot of times peer pressure could be used in the negative or in the positive. Remember in COVID, at 7 o'clock, everybody used to get up, open their windows, and clink the pans. We were all together. We're still here. In this instance, and then many other times, depending on how you grow up, peer pressure could be sometimes a little bit of trauma. Because if somebody else wants you to do it, therefore you do it, and you really want to do it. But in this instance here, I think it's a beautiful thing, because it really bonded the people together. Because as we're learning and we continue to learn, Yovel happened, and we got used to that the owner who ended up buying or taking over his neighbor's property, and that neighbor was working for him. He kind of got reliant on the fact that he had more than his own property, and he had people working for him. And it was a big deal that he had to let them go. He was used to that. I mean, you can learn a little bit more in detail from other things. So the fact that he went out and everybody went out at the same time, and they were acknowledging that this is the way, this is how God commanded us. We don't own the land. We don't own people. We don't own anything. And yes, for a certain amount of time, we were able to kind of take advantage of it. Now we're blowing the shofar with everybody else in unison, that we're all acknowledging that it's, yes, on one hand, it's hard to let go, but it's the right thing to do when we're doing it all together. So I think that's kind of like the point of the shofar, blowing it together.
In the Talmud, it expands on this and talks about the land being ownerless, hekfer. You
Hekfer.
wanna, which is not really mentioned in the Torah. You wanna expand on that a little
Oh,
bit?
you can. But it says that it sits in, it's a Shabbos, and it lays fallow, completely like Hefker, like it's for everybody.
Right.
It said in the pasuk that we read
Right.
before. But
And so even, so in the Shemitah year, when the land was considered
everybody's.
everybody's. So let's say you owned a piece of property and there were like leftover vegetables, fruits, grains, whatever. anyone in the community could come by and take it.
That's not
wasn't-
Shemitah. That's every single year. That's called Leket, Shikha,
No,
and Peah.
but especially during.
That was
the
last
Shmi-
week's parsha.
In the Shemitah year, you couldn't say to your neighbor, you can't come and take from my property
Yes,
because.
that was Shemitah.
But that Shemitah, the entire farm was open to everybody all the time, right?
In Shemitah,
Yeah.
yes. Yes,
For animals, it says it in there.
right,
For anybody who's in the
Right.
around there, for the owner, for everybody,
right,
because he didn't do any work.
right.
He didn't plow it, didn't do
But-
anything.
but-
But the rest of the years, there's something called, I think didn't we study that last week or 2 weeks ago? Leket Shikha Peah. So if he's plowing and something falls on the floor,
Right.
he
but
cannot
that's
pick that up. That's for the
For
paupers.
the poor, right.
And then the
and-
corner of the land, and then
Right,
the
the payout, right.
the bundles.
But this is, I'm not talking, obviously, there's no harvesting going on. So if there's no harvesting going on, anyone at any time can, and go on the property and take whatever is there. If they,
What about the
I think-
animals? What about milking the cows?
I don't know. It's a good
That's-
when
that's different.
I don't know.
Question.
they,
They-
They must.
They have to milk
That's a
the
good
cows.
question. I don't know. Maybe somebody knows. What do they do with the cows?
This
Well,
is
we
all
don't-
about the land.
I
It's
don't
nothing
know.
about what's growing on
Right.
the land, it's not about the cows or
So
animals.
that was there was no shemitah regarding the cows milking the
They
cows.
all died.
You still had to take care of them, right? Right.
Physically, that can't work, because I lived on a functioning dairy farm for 3 years. The cow suffers if it isn't
Right.
milked every single day. So that's out of the area of the proclamation. It has,
So even on Shabbos,
yes,
in those they would milk the cows.
I think so. Boy, if I were a cow, I'd be
Definitely.
pretty upset.
I don't think they had the kind of industrial agriculture that we have today.
No, but
Yeah.
in my experience of the Amish who live up here and who are deeply religious and definitely take their Sundays, I think they have to continue with their with some of the chores even on that day off. And perhaps I would assume that's biblically based also, any commandment, anything that because they're so very literal and so much of it.
I wanted to introduce a framework here, and we're kind of going back and forth, when discussing the Yuval and what they did and all. There's very little evidence that the Yuval was actually ever really practiced. So the question is, how do we also treat this not in terms of what did they do, what didn't they do, but as an aspirational document for today to guide our relationship to
Nice.
other people and to the environment? And it's interesting because in Israel, as part of the basic laws, there's all this stuff around private property ownership, and most of the ownership of the land is by the state, et cetera. So it shows that way. I know that there's modern practices of a Shemitah, which I don't think have to do that much with poverty and stuff. It's just what you're in terms of letting the land rest and what you can eat, what you can't eat, et cetera. So I think maybe we could do this in the after party if the room doesn't want to do this. But to me, the interesting question is, what are the underlying values here that I think we're trying to learn from this document that could apply to the way we conduct our relationship to nature and our relationship to each other today?
Yeah. Okay. Then we should continue.
No, I just
But-
want to make one comment. We live in a world that all these stories are Bubba
Yeah, Bubba mice.
Right. And, we should really think about the big picture, and it's not really the facts. But, think about a bunch of Jews, and somebody says to them, right, by the way, every seventh year, you're taking the year off. These were all farmers. This was an agricultural community. I think they took the year off. Now, I don't know how many hundreds of Shemitahs there were, because the country was destroyed after several hundred years. But, think of the faith involved. To
Yeah.
stop working, how am I going to live? How am I going to eat? They had to have a certain faith. And you think about Judaism and the oh, this was all made up by a couple of guys in the desert, you know. I mean, this was actually going on, and someone had to have faith that they would survive.
And we're talking not about some big rabbi. We're talking about a regular farmer.
Good point.
Right? How did they have this emuna and this faith that every 7 years they didn't do anything? We all, if you're going to learn, it's also basically gave us in the 6th year for 3 years, because so you had to have faith that you weren't going to really be more than 1 year. It's really 3 years.
Yeah.
It's really 2 years.
2 years.
One of my chavrusas yesterday was telling me that we see from here that in every single one of us as Jewish people, our essence is really, really, we have such potential that even a farmer could actually do that every 7 years. So it's really intrinsically in us, in the essence of our neshama, the ability to reach such high levels, to be able to have such emuna that on the 7th year, every 7 years, we do nothing. This is our business, and we keep a Shabbos.
It's actually trust.
Trust.
It's like trusting Hashem to.
That's actually in the words of the Torah pretty soon. It's called betach, the security. Anyway,
I wanted to say that last night, Rabbi Naftali Siddiq from the Carlbach Show said, we really didn't do this. It was not possible. And what we would do is sell it to a non-Jew. And that's how we got around this. But
like Pesach chametz?
Yeah.
Selling the chametz to a non-Jew, and you really still had the chametz in your
it's
house?
disappointing to hear that.
But so that's one commentary. Yeah.
What I wanted to say is what Yair was talking about, and the important thing about learning Torah is really how does it affect you, and Shabbat and Shemitah are connected.
Right.
They're interconnected, and Shabbat and Shemitah are about really the deep. It's that life is not about working, and it's not about manipulation of the land. Or people. It's about our connection with God.
Yes.
And holiness, and Shabbos is that part of life, and Shemitah, part of the essence of life, is really to be deeply connected to God, and we can only do that when we rest.
Yes.
And so the rest, and it's a certain kind of rest. It's like the rest that we're doing right now. We're not going to the beach, but we're really going inside and seeing how this speaks to us as individuals, and how our life is going to be more alive, how we're going to be more alive in our lives.
Beautiful.
How we're going to be more connected to each other and to God.
Thank you.
Joe, is there any significance to the reset being on Yom Kippur?
I don't know the answer to that. I
Like you'd think it would be, at the
I
start of
asked
the
that
new
same
year.
question actually yesterday. I didn't get a full answer about that. Why is Yovel in the blow the shofar on Yom Kippur? Don't know.
I
Want to continue? Should we continue?
I wanted to connect what the rabbi said in that the first evidence of the Jews having emunah and in regards to the Shabbat is in the desert when they got a double portion of manna on Friday, and they had to have trust that come Sunday it would come again, and that was the first kind of test of their emunah, getting a double portion of manna on Friday. Right.
Yeah.
I think the Yovel is more problematic.
What's problematic about Yovel?
Because you have to have at least 3 years of supplies in order to survive.
Right.
So that's just doesn't seem very realistic.
God makes that promise to us. It says it right in there. I don't know if the psukim were in order, but where do we go? It's right in the Torah. God makes a promise to us that He'll give us, in the 6th year, enough for the 7th, 8th, and 9th. Was it 7th, 8th, and 9th?
No, 6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8. Sorry.
Wow.
On the 6th, right? It's enough for 6, 7, and 8. Thank you,
I
Alan.
don't know.
They built
What?
What?
That's, you don't think it's possible? You
You
know,
can form a little bit, on the side.
anyway, I think we should continue. The second page, on the second side of the first page. B'kirashim eshanas hamishim shana, and you should make the 50th year holy. You cross them drawer, and you should call it drawer. What does the word drawer mean? I mean, could be generations, it's not, but it really means freedom here. Freedom in the land, the Chol Yoshvav, freedom in the land for all its inhabitants. Yovel hi tiyalachem, it should be a year of jubilee. The Shavatem Ishel Achuzo, and every man the land should return back to its original owners. The ish el mishpachto tashuva, and each and every single person should go back to his family. So that is referring to what we talked about before, connecting back to it's a freedom Yovel year for the land goes back to the ancestral lands. It's no longer remains where it is, where it's been, and the person that's working on somebody else's field, he goes back to his family. So obviously they call it drawer, which is freedom, which is probably the most important thing about Yovel. And then it goes on the next two psukim, and then we'll go, in the middle of this whole thing of Shemitah and Yovel that talks about, we were talking before about interest. And I underlined it. V'chi simkeru mimchor lamisacha okona miyad amisacha al tono ish esachayiv. When you're selling property to your neighbor or you're buying something from your neighbor, you should not wrong one another. This is speaking about what they call in the Gemara and the Talmud, onah. Do not cheat somebody else. And interesting, onah we understand. So what does this have to do with Shemitah and Yovel? Everybody asks. Shemitah and Yovel is referring to the actual land. This is actual, land, real estate, so to speak. But onah or interest, all these things are speaking about something that's movable. So it's very different than that. It also includes not just dealing falsely with somebody in a business transaction. It's also onah's devarim, which is meaning your speech. You cannot slight people. That is part of the exact same law here that's in here. I think it's pretty interesting to point out that it's not just in business doing something shady, but also saying something not nice about somebody, which is called onah's devarim. So, I mean, I thought it was. I just think that's really interesting. Yes, Tony.
Just Jubu moment, Jewish Buddhist or Buddhist Jew moment. One of the Buddha's Eightfold Path is right speech, and it refers, among other things, to saying nice things to people and not saying not nice things. And there's a great story of Ram Dass's where he goes to his guru and says, "How do I find God?" And Bhim Karoli Baba says, "Love everyone and speak the truth." And about a few days later, Ram Dass comes scrambling back and says, "I'm trying to love everybody, but I'm speaking the truth, and they're all irritated. All these people are irritating me. How do I speak the truth and also love everybody?" And that's the dilemma. That's the challenge of right speech. To somehow make that both find a way to speak the truth, but in a kind and considerate way.
Nice. And then it continues on, and it just speaks about. Then it goes back to Shemitah and Yovel, and it talks about the how do you determine the amount somebody should be selling somebody else's their field, even they're not really selling it because you don't own anything. But anyway, the last thing is Basis. If you look at the second page in the middle of it, I have it underlined betach, which is really everything. Basisem es chukosai des mishpatai. And you should do my commandments and tishmaro and keep them basisem asam. V'shaptam ala eretz la betach. Basically, if you follow Shemitah and Yovel, you will have betach. Betach means security. So, and then the next book is the same thing. And that's an arts period, achaltam l'sova, and then the land will give fruits, and you'll eat till you're satisfied. Yishachtem lebeta halal, and you will have security. So the underlying point over here, the underlying point is that if you keep the Shemitah, you're gonna have security. If you turn the page, Pitomer, like you were saying before, Pitomer manocha bashana hashvius, and you're gonna say, what am I gonna eat on the 7th year? Because you're not allowed to plant anything. So turn the page. Vitzivisi es berchasi. God has commanded. God is saying that I am going to bless you with 3 years on the 6th year. 3 years of crop. And then skip the next pasuk, and the last one says, I think is very important. This talks about intergenerational wealth of poverty. Va'aretz lo simkar litz misus. Ki li haaretz, ki gerim etoshim atamidin. And the land cannot be sold in perpetuity, meaning that it reverts back to the original owners, like we were talking about before, and the people that work there revert back.
I like that line, that, take from the field as you aren't special.
Oh, you like that? Where were you looking at? Oh, well, that was,
Constantly
yeah.
putting us in our
Yep.
place,
Right, that's the whole, right.
that
We're not any more special than anybody else.
right, exactly, but we're holy,
All right,
although it's not said.
all right. All the English you see afterwards is just my notes that I was like thinking about, things that are on my mind. I mean, it's not necessarily, I can't say that it's all truth, but it's just, maybe it's my truth. And that's just the stuff I was like
Okay,
thinking
Julia.
about this week.
Okay, Julia.
Yeah,
But Joe, also about maintaining economic balance, one
Yeah.
of the other features of Yovel was that debts are forgiven.
yeah,
Right.
right.
Which is perhaps even more significant than the land returning to the original owner, because everyone had land originally. It's
Yeah.
just a reshifting of ownership.
Mm,
But the fact that all debts are forgiven, I think, is really an incredible thing.
Yeah.
Don't lend money in the 6th year.
Yeah, good.
Oh,
How many
Right after
people,
Yovel.
how many people
No, that's
live,
only Yovel.
how many people live for 49 years?
Back then.
Well,
Yeah,
Good question.
Not a lot.
you know, and
I-
slaves were like adults at the beginning, and how many people, I found this, it's like a fairy tale.
Historically, people lived as long as we do. It's just because of infant mortality that the median statistics change. We're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Plenty of people actually made it
Really?
into their 70s and 80s and 90s.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a-
I think we're, in my view, I think it's an accent on the wrong syllable. I mean, because of all the things that we have in the Tanakh, this is pretty much agreed to that it was sadly never practiced. So whether people live for 49 years or what, I think the issue is aspirational. The issue is what kind of values are we trying to inculcate here, even if they were never really practiced.
How do you know it was never practiced? How do you know?
Through scholarship, historical and biblical scholarship
No, no.
pretty much agrees. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
So just take it one step further. So and so said it on such and such a day in such and such a year.
I agree with you.
Historical, yeah.
No,
dude.
it was in our tradition, and the redactors put it.
Name somebody who said it at a certain time.
That's the point. That's exactly the point. What were they trying to teach us, even if it was never practiced? That's exactly my point.
Why can't we agree that both are true?
Shemitah is practiced to this day in Israel, but the Jubilee year is not.
Yes, Yuval was never. I'm not talking about Shemitah. I'm talking about Yuval. We were just talking about does somebody live for 49 years, etc.
Anyway, I just want to.
Okay, I heard it through the grapevine.
Okay,
Yeah.
This is summarized a little bit. I mean, I was actually on my city bike yesterday, going from getting some bread from Chal on 113, going to the vegan place, and I was thinking about this whole thing that we started with here. And I think that I want to share a few, hopefully some nice thoughts. So getting back to the beginning, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Bahar Sinai. What's a Har Sinai? So I have two brothers that are, one's a rabbi that Rabbi David always talks about. He learned with him in Chavrusa and Avi Weiss's Kolo years and years ago. He's a modern Orthodox rabbi in Potomac. And I have another brother, Abe, who is a therapist in Delray. They're very crazy mountain bikers. So we go on a brothers trip every single year, usually after Pesach. And we go somewhere for 3-4 days. We mountain bike. And they're much better than I am. I have to keep up with them anyway. So I was thinking about the mountain. And one of my older brother, he was also a big skier. So the first thing I thought about, I don't know if there's certain saying this, but you got to respect the mountain. The mountain. Whether you're mountain biking, whether you're skiing, you could play on it. You could enjoy it. You can share the mountain. But once you try to own the mountain in any which way, you disrespect it, bad things happen to you. So I think that starting the Torah portion, Bahar Sinai, explicitly when it comes to Shemitah and Yovel, God is trying to share with us how important these laws are, or like the lessons learned from it. And then, of course, my mind started thinking a little further. If really the whole message here is we own nothing, we don't own the land, God owns it, we're a conduit, we're supposed to respect it, we're supposed to be good custodians. So it got me thinking that when we rented an Airbnb, and there was like a part of the mountain that only the people that lived in that house could use. So the owner basically was saying, like, rent my Airbnb, and my family and his family lived like in another house. They came and they were using it, but only the guests could use it, thinking that, okay, he is part of this mountain, and like, oh, it's private, only certain people can use the mountain. And I was thinking that's like kind of defeating, because we all know generational wealth, after like 2-3 generations later, everybody loses it anyway. So he's trying to preserve this mountain and this bike so his grandkids or his kids can also enjoy it. Wouldn't it have been better for him to feel like he doesn't really own it, donate it to the park or donate it to the state, whatever it is, and then everybody could mountain bike on it, and of course his grandkids would be able to use it as well. I mean, this is like extending this concept. We own nothing. Wouldn't that have been a much better idea?
Okay,
Because
you're hired as chief economist of something.
I was just like thinking that's like maybe start thinking about the Har Sinai.
Communism, anyone?
Then my brother shared with me, the rabbi, he was saying that just to further this thought, about 10 years ago, his computer got corrupted, and he had a lot of different things that a lot of different classes and sermons on it, and this and this and that. So he was going crazy trying to fix it. He's also in a big rabbi chat, and a lot of the rabbis, they share things, share documents and everything else. But some of the rabbis wouldn't mention me. He's like laughing. Only share it in a PDF and not in a Word document. And because this way they have to quote the other rabbi, and like you can't change the document. My brother said, "Listen, Torah's Torah. I don't own Torah. Everybody owns it. Whatever my thoughts are, I'm sending to everybody when they ask me for something in a Word document. Do whatever you want with it. I'm sharing my Torah. Nice. We share the land, this and that." Yeah. What happened, of course, he never got the documents that he thought was his, not he thought was his, that he didn't share with people because his computer got corrupted. But all the documents that he shared with everybody else, he was able to retrieve. Because by sharing something that we don't really own anything, I think that's really the message here. Sharing something with everybody is something that is getting back to the pasuk. What's everlasting? Only something that we share. Something that we don't share is not going to be everlasting, and that's kind of the message I think that we're learning from Shemitah.
So poetry.
Nissen Antine.
In poetry, you put it out in the world. It doesn't bring in much money. You give it away, and that's the essence of it. To give it away.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about the same thing, because I have poetry, and for me, once I put a poem out in the world, it's no longer mine. And I'm not concerned with, oh, did you mean this? Did you mean that? No, I want it to mean whatever it means to you. It's no longer mine. So that's even more of an extension of that kind of view.
This allows me to share the one piece of Hebrew knowledge that I claim to have, and I stand to be corrected. But I had my first Jewish friend in third grade was called Yuval. Not Yoval.
Yeah, Yuval.
And so he explained to me, it's the same letters, of course, but Yoval Jubilee, but Yuval stream, tributary, flow. So like that which you let into the flow of life, which you put into the mainstream, which you let float away, will also return to you on that same river. And that which you artificially try to stabilize, obviously, is subject to disappearance. So,
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's very good. Now I've been a Hebrew scholar.
That's beautiful.
If you want to get real intense, we can learn a Hasidic master. One, if we have 10 more minutes, or unless somebody else wants to share something.
There was a section where Hashem made a rule where the slave who wished to still be a slave.
You talking about Abed Ivri, a Jewish slave?
Yeah, like they choose to after Jubilee, they still want to be slave. There's this concept of piercing the ear.
Yeah.
Right.
The doorpost.
Yeah, doorpost to really establish like I've given up my land and I want to maintain this relationship as still slave, but there is that concept as well. Right? Free will, choosing to become always choose.
I forgot what is that? That's Parshas Mishpatim. I think we had a whole class about that like a year or 2 years ago. That when you pass through it has to be at the doorpost because that was the whole thing with the Korban Pesach. So therefore you have to.
So the slave is freely choosing
to like to give it up. Yeah.
Public display.
Public display. That was a public display as well.
Right.
It was public.
So it wasn't like between the two people, but that everyone knew what was going on because it was in public display.
Yeah. And all those in between the psukim and like, and I it's just me rambling. I don't know if it makes any sense to anybody. That's just stuff that I've been studying the whole week. But I think that the Ishbitzer Rebbe, which is shares something very, very interesting. I mean, it's all here if anyone wants to see it. I can read it inside, or I can just tell it outside, whatever it is. This is really he shares a famous concept in Kabbalah. It's called Olam, Shana, and Nefesh that we're busy with in our lives. There's certain place. There's Olam, which is the world. Nefesh is us as people, and Shana is time. And the vortex usually of that, the best classic example of that is the high priest of Kohen Gadol, so that's Nefesh. Olam and Shana is the Holy of Holies on the day which is Yom Kippur. That's like the vortex of all the three things coming together. And really, each and every one of us in our lives always have an Olam Shana Nefesh moment. And how do we react? Do we progress or do we not progress? That's constantly what God is putting together for us. But he wants us to extend this concept into this week's Parsha. And I think it's pretty interesting because we have Shemitah, we have the Shemitah, which is, we have Shemitah, we have giving back the slaves, and we have this whole thing with interest. So he says that those are also the same. It's like in the parsha we have a situation of Olam, Shana, and Nefesh because we have the land, which is Olam, which is Shemitah. We have Shana, which is time, that relates to interest. Don't put your betach, don't put your security in any one of those because God owns everything. Don't put it in the land, which is Olam. Don't put it in time because time is what interest is all about. You can't put your security that you're going to live based upon selling time, which is interest. And nefesh is taking advantage of other people. You have to put your own betach in God. Don't put it in doing things wrong with interest or doing things wrong with having slaves or this field when you're not supposed to use it. So that's the same concept in this Torah portion. And that's exactly what it says in the Torah, but about betach, security. put it in God. Put it, because we own nothing and we should put only our security into God. Don't put it necessarily into those three aspects of life.
Very high ideals. I wonder, if they can ever be reached. They're really,
Those ideas?
yes.
Good question. We can aspire to them.
Utopia.
Yeah.
That's why it's a Hasidic master from the 1750s.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There was a
Yeah.
woman called
Why not?
Mother Teresa, and she
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah, why not?
No, she didn't.
There's a woman in Hildegard of Bingen, and she did some of that same kind of thing.
Go for it.
But also, yeah.
There were people that did it.
May I?
Sure, of course.
interject?
Hey.
This has been so
Yeah.
beautiful and
Really
inspiring.
amazing.
I don't want to muddy the water, so I'm gonna just say one sentence.
Sure.
I am working on a bill that will stop the global warming. Nobody takes any money. We do it for free. We have 15 members of Congress who have co-signed the bill that says that if it comes to a vote, we'll say yes. So we're getting there. And more than 1/3 of the bill has to do with regenerative farming.
Oh.
And I just want people to talk to me offline because this was so beautiful. I didn't even want to interrupt it, but I
What's the
thought,
bill
well,
called, though?
I'll give it to you afterward. I'll
And
give you
what's
the
your
whole
name?
schmeal. Well, I walk around with it in my head. But this was absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for letting me share.
Thank you.
I will try Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
What?
You had these notes written up?
This is what I studied